Good morning on our last day of the summit in Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. It truly is an honour to be a visitor on this country, albeit a little cool at this time of year for us from the West. Secondly, thank you to the Australian Human Rights Commission for bringing us together to attend the summit. It is a privilege to stop tending to spot fires in our communities and have an opportunity to look around and understand what's causing them. Many of us do not have those opportunities or those times to do that, so thank you so much for making space. Welcome to our panel discussion titled First Matriarchs, First Innovators, How First Nations Women's Knowledges and Practices are the Key to a Vibrant Future for All. To innovate is to make change happen. And while there are many firsts in this session's title, many firsts are still yet to come for First Nations women. I look forward to the day when these are no longer firsts, but they have become normalised, as we are worthy of being in these positions and places. My name is Mandy Downing. I'm a Ngunnawal Jabari woman. For those from country who don't recognise me, I'm part of the Lockyer family. I live and work off-country at Curtin University as the Dean of Indigenous Futures in the Faculty of Humanities, which is located on Whadjuk Noongar Boodja in Western Australia. I wear a few other hats, which you can read about in the program if you're overly interested, but I will make a quick shout out to the team who I do work with at IATSIS. I know some of you are in the audience. But I've got three fantastic panellists who I'd like to introduce you to today. So, Rachel Perkins is an Australian film and television director, producer and screenwriter. Rachel's Aranda Kalkadoon heritage has informed her entire filmmaking career. She has contributed extensively to the development of Indigenous filmmakers in Australia and more broadly to the Australian film and television industry. Tamina Pitt is a Google Maps software engineer and a founding member of the Google Aboriginal and Indigenous Network chapter in Australia. She is a Wudithia and Miriam woman, meaning that her ancestors are Aboriginal from far north Queensland and the Torres Strait Islands. And Carly Noon is the first Indigenous woman in Australia to graduate with a double degree in maths and physics. She's an astronomer of the Gamilaroi people, multiple award winner, 2019 Eureka Prize nominee, and one of the 2017 BBC's 100 Women. Now, I'm going to throw to Carly first because we're unfortunately going to lose her a little early. So just wondering if you might be able to tell us a bit about what you're working on at the moment.
Yama, hello. Ningtagaba, everyone. I hope you're good. Thank you so much for having me here. It's an absolute privilege to be on this stage with these incredible women, but to be with all of you here today as well. I am really sorry. I do have to leave a little bit early. I have to go look after my own matriarch and take care of my mum, otherwise she'll rouse me and I don't want that. But yeah, so I work in this astronomy space most of the time. I'm currently about 2 years into my PhD, which is super deadly. It was a dream for me to get to this point and to get that floppy hat, so thank you. I feel really friggin' blessed to be able to do the work that I do, not just to be able to look at our galaxy. That's what I focus on, looking at the Milky Way. And to do that, I use huge radio telescopes, many of which are located on Aboriginal lands. But I'm also really lucky because I get to engage so much in our cultural stories that have to do with the sky. So I haven't been here for the past couple of days. I was up in Sydney talking to a bunch of young Aboriginal dancers, talking about sky law and talking about the importance of our knowledge and our knowledge systems and how we view the world, because I think it's incredibly important. For so long, we have absolutely, undeniably, systematically been kept out of these spaces. When we all know we're literally the first astronomers, we have so much knowledge that Western science just isn't capable of seeing or perceiving. And so I was saying to those young dancers, my ultimate goal is, instead of having to talk about, well, here's our Indigenous stories and this is what mobs say, and over here we have Western science and what they say, we're really looking at the same thing. And ultimately, I hope one day I can just talk about astronomy. I don't have to break it up for people to be able to understand and digest, and to be able to, accept these two things as being equal, because they really are. And if anything, our knowledge and our values and our culture is so needed in today's modern age, where we face so many issues of disconnection and exploitation, and there's no one that knows more about that than mob. So yeah, I think I'll pretty much leave it at that, and hopefully I'll be back in a bit.
Thank you. Just a quick reminder, I should have mentioned this earlier, we will have Q&A at the end of this session, so questions, you can put them through on the app. Hopefully by now you've all got it. But now I'll go to maybe Tamina.
Sure.
Tell us what you're working on. Thanks.
Thanks, Mandy. Hi, everyone. My name's Tamina Pitt. I want to start by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people in the Ngambri and thank Arnie for a welcome earlier this week. I've spent the week here at the summit and have been really inspired by all the matriarchs that I've seen in the room, and I'm really honoured that I can be on the stage here and speak to you guys. So thank you for the invitation, June and the organising team. So my name's Tamina Pitt and I'm a software engineer and I work for Google Maps. I've worked at Google for 4 years, where my role involves building the app. We maintain the app. If anything breaks, I'll be the person that investigates and tries to fix it. So don't complain to me after, because every time I tell people that I work for Google Maps, suddenly somebody's got a problem with their street or whatever. I don't want to know. But yeah, how did I get into software engineering? I studied at university. I studied computer engineering at the University of New South Wales. When I was a kid, I was a bit of a computer geek. I always tell the story that I hacked into my brother's laptop when I was like 10 years old because he forgot the password. And I don't know if anyone here remembers MySpace. Okay. Good, because I don't think it's easy anymore, and it's just like only a brief period. But you used to be able to customize your page and write HTML code. So that was like the first time I ever wrote, figured out what was going on in there and understood a language that the computer can understand. So those were kind of my experiences where I first started kind of looking inside the computer and trying to think about how it works. But I didn't really think about working in software as a career for me until later on in life. I was in high school, I was a real maths nerd, and I wanted to do as much math as possible. I don't know if anyone can relate except Carly.
Very relatable.
And I was thinking of doing a math degree, but I thought, what can I do that would be a bit more interesting? And that's when I learned about engineering. And what I learnt about engineering is that we kind of use our understanding of science and technology and we solve everyday problems. So software engineers, we use our understanding of computers to build apps or, that can help you get around Google Maps, or I've seen examples where mob use apps for learning languages and, everything that we use for software. So I went to uni and studied engineering. And that's how I got to today. I did some internships at Google when I was a student and got converted to the full-time role. At Google, I also... as Mandy mentioned in the intro, I also founded the Australian chapter of the Google Aboriginal and Indigenous Network. So this is a network that started in the States, where there's Native American mob over there that represent their people at the Google level, and I wanted to start an Australian chapter to represent the community that we have here. And I feel like it goes without saying that there's not that many black people that are in this engineering sector. When I was in university, I could count on one hand how many people were studying in science and engineering. There was one friend that I had that was in computer science, and then the other one was my brother. He does software engineering too. Anyway, so I started this network at work because I wanted to create a community space for black fellas that are working at Google and represent our mob at the international scale, and create a community space. We do kind of professional development and cultural activities as well as part of our network. So I've really enjoyed, and that's something that I'm passionate about, is creating space for black fellas that are working in tech. And I guess on that, another project that I'm working on is the First Nations Place Name Project with Kelly Saunders. Hey, Kelly. And Rach McPhail. So it's led by 3 amazing black women and an ally, Kaz McGrath. And the aim of the First Nations Place Names Project is that we want a First Nations-led cultural protocol first community consultative project where we collect First Nations place names and represent our knowledges in the digital form. And that's something I'm really passionate about, is having applying that cultural lens to technology and making sure that we do things the right way. So I'm really hoping that that project gets off the ground. It's in our early days, we're getting started, but stay tuned for more. Thank you.
Rachel, over to you.
I might get up there just because
Sure.
I've got all these bits to juggle. Can I just reiterate my thanks, June, to you and your team. Kimberly, for having us here. It's brilliant. And I want to also acknowledge Matilda, who's on the phone. She's a busy lady. But, for her support and guidance over decades and leadership here on Ngunnawal Ngambri country. Thank you, Matilda. So this panel's about innovation, and I wanted to talk about cultural innovation and identity, because the report that June put together after going around to all of our communities identified that culture and identity are one of our key strengths. And so some of my work is about maintaining, reasserting and recording our culture and identity. And I wanted to acknowledge matriarch Freda Glynn, who's a Kaditch woman from Alice, and she started CAMA, the Central Australian Aboriginal Media Association, many years ago. And that's where I got my first traineeship. I was like these young people here, and I started out and plucked out of thing and just given this traineeship, and I've become a filmmaker, and so have many others of the trainees who went through the organisation that she established. So without that, she was a major innovator. She saw that satellite technology was coming, television was coming to our communities, and she was like, right, we have to harness this medium for our cultural survival, and we have to get these young people, train them up, and so that they can then go on and be the conduit for our people to talk through and our culture to be maintained in this new digital age. So she was a great innovator, and I'm here because of her in many ways. I wanted to talk about my community now, the Aranda Nation, which is the blue triangle in the middle, and that's where I connect to via my grandmother, who was an amazing matriarch herself. She had 13 children. She was born because her mother survived a massacre in Central Australia, and she was there right in the transition of the world when whitefellas came into it, and she grew up there at Altunga and was a stock woman and an amazing survivor. And she eventually worked at a native institution called the Bungalow where my father was born, and where Frida Glynn was, and where a lot of people have come through. So I wanted to recognise her, and I wanted to talk about the culture that flows through her to us and many others. So I wanted to talk about a project that the Aranda women from my community, some of whom are here today, we decided that we were going to work together to try and harness and capture our culture through in our songs, because the Aranda Nation, you know, it took whitefellas 100 years to get through the desert to get to us, and it protected us, and it means that we have still some of our song traditions intact. And you know, we know that the songs are important. They carry the healing power of healing, and they carry the aljera, dreaming, and many other things. So the women who are here today and me, we decided that we were going to have a strategic process to harness and maintain those songs. And so with the leadership of our old ladies, MK Turner, who's the mother of some delegates here, Amelia and Veronica, she was one of the senior leaders that worked with us more middle-aged women to organise what we called the Aranda Women's Camp. And I'll show you the other leaders of the camp, but they've passed away now. And so what we did first is we went to every archive in Australia, and we gathered anything of Aranda women's song traditions. So we went to Canberra, all over the place, and we found as many of our song recordings as we could that were in the archive. And of course, anthropologists were mostly men back in the day, right? So our women didn't talk to those anthropologists, so we didn't have that strong archival records that had been made in the 60s and 70s, but we did have some precious songs. So we did a database of those songs, and we returned those songs to the daughters and granddaughters of those women that had recorded those songs. And actually we discovered a collection made in the 1960s by Ada Lawton, who was probably the first Aboriginal woman who ever made a recording. And she recorded songs. We found them in like a biscuit tin on reel-to-reels. Her granddaughter brought them to us. So we digitised those and we translated those songs. And we need to innovate, right, in this world, because we're no longer necessarily living on our country all the time, or we're not on the stations, you know, where we used to be able to sing together every night and the songs would be passed down just by being around each other. Now, a lot of us live in towns. A lot of us don't necessarily speak fluently our languages that the songs are in. So we're like, how do we innovate, you know, to try and capture and ensure that this is passed down to the younger generations over the next hundreds of years. So it was challenging to talk because the women, the senior women, you know, they're not used to necessarily recording their songs and then giving it to someone. You know, those people, usually you'd sing the songs to them over years, and the younger people would pick them up and they would learn it that way. So our women had to make a decision to change their way of passing songs on. And they acknowledged in that change that they would have to use new technologies and record their songs and then agree to store that in an archive. So we had to talk about all different ways of how's our knowledge protected in archives, how's it managed, who's it passed on to, how does that happen? So it was really challenging to work through a lot of those things. But we did. And so over 6 weeks with MK and other women, we had a camp. And we went through all the family groups, and we had a film that we ran it like a film shoot. I was like, right, next family, come on. And they all came in, and we had a cook, and it was all Aboriginal women that organised it, all Arrernte women. We did it all ourselves. And we had 2 cameras, and we had a sound recordist, and we did it all really properly so that, you know, we're thinking, what does a woman need in 200 years to be able to learn this stuff? Well, she needs to see the singer really up close to see how the words are pronounced, how the songs are sings. So we had cameras on people like this, and we had quality sound recording, and all the women came, and young people, middle-aged people. It was really good, because what we'd realised is that the older ladies all held the songs, but very few of the middle-aged ladies were learning those songs. It just wasn't being transferred. So we recorded everything that was in living memory of any other senior Arrernte lady who would like to attend. And so for 6 weeks we did that. Here's all the ladies. Oh, thanks for the cheers. It was great. And these are some of the ladies. Time is short, but I just want to show you a video. It's only 1 minute and 30 seconds. Is that okay? And there's a couple of ladies who've passed away in this, but they gave permission for the image to be seen. There's Purvis ladies from Alcura, there's Arrernte people in the audience, so they gave their permission. I'm going to try and run this now. I don't know if I've got the thing to how to do it. Oh, yeah.
Yang apa jaga il panjala jala ma wajag ralam po map ana wan ka mapa ana da akngara parar pan mapa kalcere jaga mana nang il panjet na kana yang apa jaga mata channel yang il panjakal ka kalcalan daga Rara lampuan da merama nuna pakalengkan atnya cenek ro yaralam Ara laron da ma pala daga ko da atnya cenang nuna kan il panchal awal ga atnya cek akal ceramal ingkana ni mapla na mawalta na cek
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Rachel. I'm going to throw over to Carly now so that we can talk to you before you need to go. I'd like to ask you about data governance and data sovereignty. So what unique role do you think women and girls have in innovating in this space?
Yeah, so I think we have a really good place to start from after listening to everything that you shared, Rachel. You know, when you were talking about the anthropologists going into our communities and, you know, they were mostly men, they're kind of still mostly men from what I see and what I've experienced. But they collected a lot of our stories and a lot of our culture and our knowledge. And again, from my experience going through academia, you know, a lot of these stories and a lot of our knowledge kind of gets kept there, kind of gets stuck in academia, because like before I went to uni, I didn't know how to access a journal or even what a journal was. And that's, you know, that's a really, those spaces and those archives, they hold so much that, you know, because of colonization and because of, you know, being removed from country and all of these things, a lot of us don't have access to. And so data, when I think about data sovereignty, it's really about that knowledge and those stories going back to community, just as you were saying, and going back to, you know, especially the younger people who it's really, you know, our jobs to continue that lineage. Like we really have to be picking up our culture and our stories and bringing it all together. Unfortunately, you know, kind of cleaning up all of this mess that these white fellas have created for us. And so data sovereignty is really taking control of that, but not just, you know, accessing these white fella like renditions of our stories, but, you know, really trying to connect to our old people as much as we possibly can while, you know, we're still lucky enough to be able to do that. I know for me myself, like I'm only 32, and already I'm sadly losing a lot of my matriarchs. And so for me and my family, you know, time's really ticking, but I know that it's not too different for other mob out there as well. And so data sovereignty is really about taking control of that and you know, us being able to tell our own stories instead of it coming out of a journal or you know, an academic who doesn't come from these lands or doesn't, you know, have connections to our countries. Now there's some really awesome examples of this happening across the country, and what I really like about you know, what you shared with us, Rachel, is that it was so place-based, right? We're often put under this pressure to be like this national force, and we definitely are. Like, obviously, you know, we've seen this week what we can do when we come together. But really, you know, our knowledge and our culture is very connected to our own countries. And so we do see some of these, you know, we've spoken about the archive, which is essentially all the information that's been taken and put into, you know, a paper or some other form. And, you know, the act of going through that archive and actually bringing that knowledge back to its specific location is incredibly important, because for so long it's kind of been, you know, shared off country and kind of shared all across the country. And, you know, it's just not really how our mobs work and how our countries work and our laws. There is actually a really great example of a national effort though, and I have to mention Tamina's incredible matriarch, your deadly mum, Dr. Terry Jenke, who put together this incredible piece of work that's scoping out this idea of like a First Nations science centre and what that could look like. And, you know, Terry really outlines the fact that our mobs and communities have been so exploited for so long now. And we actually really need control of that. Like, that can't keep going on. And I love this work because Terry just calls it out. She's just in there and I love it. And, you know, I think that's really what we need, not only to be able to say, okay, this was taken from us, we're taking it back, but we can also overlay that information and those stories with our own cultural law, with our own cultural protocol. So, you know, for example, in kind of sky world, the moon is a really interesting object in the sky. So for women, for a lot of mobs, the moon, we call it Balu. You're not supposed to look at Balu for a lot of young girls and a lot of young women. And, you know, it all has to do with our fertility cycle and how that relates to the moon cycle. And, you know, having this cultural law applied to our stories, so, you know, we're not endangering ourselves culturally and spiritually when we do engage with our stories, which is obviously something that, you know, the anthropologists didn't really know when they were documenting it. But for me, as a young Aboriginal woman, when I go into the archive and I'm researching, it's actually quite culturally and spiritually dangerous for me because I don't actually know what I'm going to be exposed to. And that's what I mean when I talk about like Indigenous data sovereignty. You know, we have our own laws applied to it. I'm not going to see something that is going to harm me. And that's really where I think, hopefully one day, you know, thanks to people like Terry and the institutions that support that work, we'll be able to get to where we're really in control, and we have, you know, not only can we continue our stories, but we can do it in a way that is, safe for us to do so.
Thank you so much. I guess I can confirm that the First Nations Science Centre is progressing. I do have a role on the steering committee, so it is moving forward, slowly but surely. Tamina, how do you feel your presence in the software engineering sector impacts it, and how important is it to be there?
I feel like it's really good that I just went after you, Carly, because I was thinking about data sovereignty. But I think it's really important that First Nations people are represented in the software engineering sector, and that we have software engineers in our community. I think that's important because, you know, of representation. We don't have population parity for software engineers, and I'd like to see that. And, you know, what they say about having diverse teams. But I think what's really important, and to kind of add on to what Carly was saying, is that being a software engineer means that I bring my cultural perspective to my work as well. So I guess to go back to the First Nations Place Names project that I was talking about in my intro, this is a project that kind of wants to put Indigenous data sovereignty at the heart as well. And think about who owns the data and who controls that data and who writes the record. Because a lot of the data around First Nations people has been written by anthropologists and, you know, white researchers. And I think it's important that we have the tools in our hands to create our own story and have that narrative in our control. So the significance of being a software engineer as a First Nations person is that I apply my cultural perspective to my work, and I can, you know, work on projects through that lens. And the other thing is that we're going into our world is increasingly software driven. It's in everything that we do. I use Google Maps to get where I am today. You know, we've got all the technology that we've used, the app for the conference. Blackfellas are really high users of social media. And I think that having the skills in our community means that we have the power to kind of shape that world as well, because our voice deserves to be represented in this world that is increasingly software focused. And that's why I think that, you know, and it's not just software engineering. I know there's like a variety of different kind of skills that you could have and be using technology in your work, but having that representation is really important for the self-determination of our people.
Thank you. Rachel, you were talking about the generational transfer of knowledge. Can you expand on this role you think technology plays and can play in this?
Yeah, I think it's I think two things about it. I think with that project, you know, we had a couple of stages, so we were just like, let's just get everything out of the archive, let's record everything in living memory, and then we've got, you know, the stage we're now sort of coming to now is like, okay, so how do we then transfer that knowledge down to the next generation? And the senior ladies work out who those songs can go to and who can learn them, and they decide all of that. But then people have said, well, like, you know, we'd like that song to be able to take home and have privately and listen to and practice, because, you know, people feel shame about, like me, I'm not a fluent language speaker, you know, it's difficult for me to sing those songs myself too, and, you know, you want to be able to do it privately. So there's technology there that enables people to learn in different ways that they feel more comfortable with. And also it's like, because it's now a digital file, you think about, okay, well, how are we going to store that for the next hundreds and hundreds of years and maintain that and keep it there? And how can we build around that culture the right resources, so that ancient tradition, that ancient spiritual, religious, cultural lore, how do we build the resources around that in this time that we are in now, to ensure that we can revitalise it at any time. So we need the ladies to describe, how the song is sung, what the dances is, what the dance moves mean, how the paintings are done. We need all of that documentation, and we need the language translated and everything, so that a person can pick that up like hundreds of years into the future. We want Aranda women to be strong into the future and have their cultural identity intact. So that's what we're thinking about. How's this going to work in hundreds of years' time, for our young women to be able to take this up and be strong in their culture into the future. So it's a long process of, building that resource and building ways to transfer that knowledge and keep it alive into the future. So technology is there and available to us, and for those opportunities that we've been given by our elders like Frida Glynn, we were trained for this purpose. This is why they gave us those traineeships, so that we could be, for our people, provide a service to our people to maintain culture through film and television. So I think it's important, like Tamina says, to have Indigenous people working in software, working in film and television, working in all these new industries, so we can harness that skill and then turn it around and use it for the benefit of our people. Digital mapping, that's Google Maps, is, we're using that a lot now in our communities to map our sacred sites and songlines, and, so we can design programs around holding that knowledge and keeping the data sovereignty safe, keeping that knowledge safe into the future. So there's a lot of places that Indigenous people are innovating, and we need a space. We need training money, we need opportunities, pathways for our young people to get into those spaces, harness the technology.
Thank you. I'm conscious that Carly likely needs to be leaving now. So I would just ask if everyone can thank Carly for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Before I go, I'm just going to literally steal the mic for a sec and just really give a shout out to all the matriarchs, all the aunties and the sisters who are always out there fighting for our countries. It's awesome that we get to, connect to our cultures and our stories and share them, but that's really hard to do when we don't have access to our countries. And of course, because of things like mining, because of things like development that is constantly happening and threatening our countries, it makes it really hard. But I know for myself, my own country, I have incredible aunties and sisters that fight endlessly day in, day out for the protection of our countries, the protections of our totems. My Auntie Polly, my Auntie Sharon. I know in this country we have the amazing Deadly Leah House, who is always putting herself out there. I know Tarnan is here at the event this week. I saw Ruby earlier. We have so many amazing, incredible, deadly, staunch women who fight every day for our countries, and I just really want to acknowledge them and really thank them for their work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, I think we'll do one more question and then hopefully we've got some Q&A. So if you haven't already put your questions in the app, please do. Rachel. Looking ahead to 2043 and beyond, what would be your vision for the future?
2043. In relation to what part of vision? Like, what scope are you thinking there?
Well, let's go with innovation. Where do you see us in 2043? What do you see us doing, having roles in, being leaders in? Do we have governance systems protecting our Indigenous knowledge? Is it normalised to have Indigenous cultural and intellectual property and cultural governance included in, say, agreements with mob?
I hope that by 2043, we've managed to rebuild our nations, and so that we have the structures in place to look at our nations and think about them as being secure into the future. So, I know there's a lot of nation-building discussion going on in university spaces and how do we build the nations, like Maori have done in Aotearoa, New Zealand. They have got their economic base secured through treaty settlements. They have their young people, vision for their language and education for their young people. They have treaty rights with the Crown, and they have a pathway for their cultural survival and identity into the future. So I hope that, for my people, the Aranda Nation, that, all of our native title is done. We've moved beyond native title into treaty negotiations or settlement where our languages are secure. We have guaranteed health and well-being support. That I think in 20 years' time, we want to have the security of our nations and our futures guaranteed. And I think we'll get there.
Great, thank you so much. Tamina, would you like to add to that? Your vision for the future?
Sure, am I on? I think my vision for the future is that, all the conversations that we're having in this summit is that we no longer need to have these conversations again, and that, we've kind of got equal opportunities to, the rest of the population. I guess for me, particularly in software, I'd like to see blackfellas have equal access and inclusion in the digital space. And I'd love to see more black tech companies by 2043, a big black tech company.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we'll go over to our Q&A. I can see we've already got one question, and Tamina, it's right over to you again. So this question is from Taneen. What are your thoughts on the good part of AI and the scary parts of AI? And how does it impact us as blackfellas?
I knew someone was going to ask me about AI. I thought someone was going to ask me about ChatGPT or something, and I was like, I don't know what to say. So I don't work a lot in AI or machine learning in my work, but I have kind of been thinking about how AI impacts us. I think that, the new advancements that we've seen in AI, can make things really convenient. I was talking to ChatGPT about how to, what movie I should watch, making recommendations. I've seen people, actually Kaz has been using AI to automate her work, and I think it's really deadly. But yeah, I think it's there are scary parts. I think we need to make sure and have a look at the way that blackfellas are represented in AI and how we can ensure that that's a culturally safe space. And yeah, I'm interested in learning more about machine learning because I haven't really worked in it much, but I know that that's really important for the future.
Thanks, Tamina. Rachel, where and how did you secure funding for your project with the Aranda women? This question's from Carly. Thank you.
Yeah, well, we scrabbled it together from different places. So we got an Australia Council grant, and that's one of the only regular sources of funding for this sort of cultural work. We got $30,000 from them. And then we got $20,000 from Centrecorp, which is a foundation, Centrecorp Foundation, run from Indigenous-owned assets in Central Australia. And then we got $7,500 from Screen Territory Grant, and we sort of pretended we were making a film for the public, which we never intended to do because it was just for us. And so it's really hard to get the money for this stuff because there's always like a public outcome, you know, and like all the film funding is you've got to have it broadcast on television or you've got to have it out there for the public. But this was just for us in our community, so it's really hard to find that sort of money. But what we hoped was that we could use that as then a model for other communities. And one of the things when I was on the IATSIS Council, we tried to raise funds for a Songlines project so that other people could access these funds, you know, rather than go to 3 or 4 different places like we did, you know, that there'd just be funding. Because there's a big need for this recording of songs. And then it's like the more difficult thing is actually then learning the songs and finding the spaces. And, you know, it's really hard to even find places for our women to go and camp and, you know, have access to, like, we just don't have that facility. We don't have a ceremonial space where there's toilets and kitchens and, you know, so there's a big need to create spaces for this activity to happen. You know, we spend a lot of time fighting for rights for land and all these other things, which is absolutely important, but where are the spaces for us to practice our culture, you know? Where are the resources for that to happen? There's not. So, but anyway, Australia Council, that's your main one I would go to as a start.
Thank you. This next question, I'm going to offer it to Mina.
I was wondering if you wanted to answer it.
I was going to say I could possibly answer it if no one else is willing. Would you prefer that? Yeah. Okay. So the question, Serena, thank you, is how do you suggest mob that can't access journals or academic archives go about seeking data and knowledge about their people? So this is a conversation we have frequently, particularly in the university sector, and with the work I do as the co-chair of the IATSIS National Research Ethics Committee. We often hear, particularly with research, that people are going out there doing the work and we know it's being done about us, and then the knowledge is never to be seen again by our people. So I understand that IATSIS are doing some work on this, on making things available, but I do also believe that there are things that we can do as individuals around community, which is becoming aware of what your rights are, particularly around research. And when researchers are coming out to talk to you in community, push back. Let them know that you know what you're talking about. If they're saying that we want to do this with you, then you tell them what conditions you want in place. So those research outputs, the papers, the journals, the books, the productions that come out of collecting that data from you, you can be involved in the cultural governance of that. You can have an agreement put in place that stipulates what's going to happen with it, where the outputs will go, how you can access it. In academia, there's also a thing known as open access. So a lot of large funding groups are now putting in clauses that any research done with this research funding, it must be published open access, which means anyone can go online and find this information. I know the National Environmental Science Program, which is another hat I wear, I'm involved with, they have that as a standardised clause within their overarching agreement. So any research that comes from the National Environmental Science Program is publicly available if you go online. I'll stop there because I'd rather hear from everyone else.
I think the thing too that we did, we had an academic woman from the University of Sydney work with us, and she helped go through those archives, because I find it really difficult to navigate archives myself. I mean, the IATSIS archive is there, Murra, it's called Murra, hey? And you can put in a keyword and then search for stuff. But, you know, if you're looking for audio or visual, it's sometimes in another place. But IATSIS holds the largest collection of Indigenous materials in the world, of our mobs. And you can go into the reading room there and talk to the librarian, and they can also help you search under your nation or clan or group or family name. So there's that. Or you could try and find the Indigenous unit within a university and try and find Indigenous academics and researchers there who could maybe assist you as well. But yes, it's difficult to navigate those archives, absolutely. But I found that getting an academic helped us.
Thank you. Tamina, hopefully this one's for you, because I can't help you here. What's your favourite coding language?
I don't know if I have a favourite. I work with a number of coding languages in my work. C++, Java, and Objective-C. I don't know if that rings a bell for anyone. But I guess I work a lot in C++, and I just like it because I can be really nerdy about memory management, and I think at Google we have there's lots of people with lots of opinions about C++, so I learned a lot about that programming language as I was working on it at work.
Thank you. So this is our final question. I think this might be for you, Rachel. So how will the regeneration of songlines unite Australia?
Well, the regeneration of songlines certainly unites us, Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders. We've had a project where some Pitjantjatjara ladies just transferred a songline that went through their country and came into Aranda country. The Morakatui is here today for that area, and that forged a link between the Pitjantjatjara and Aranda ladies. Beautiful, strong link in regenerating that songline. So some of the songlines are just for us, right? They're not for the public. They're only for the people who they belong to. And some of that information is private and restricted because it's connected to places that are private or sacred. But I think for the outside public, there's nothing quite like seeing and being a part of a Aboriginal ceremony, you know, or Torres Strait Islander ceremony. You know, it's the rich, heart of the nation, you know, the deep, deep heritage that 65,000 years, you know, expressed in song and performance. And very few non-Indigenous people ever get to experience what it's like to sit around a campfire and have that amazing experience of witnessing that, being a part of it. And I think for those people who do get to experience that, it's transformative, because they get a sense of this ancient connection to country through song and culture. And I think that can bring Australians closer to us, because it gives them an understanding of what we feel when we talk about our identity and culture and how it's expressed. You know, they can get a sense of that, because it's very hard for them to understand it, I think. But through song and being a part of that ceremony and seeing people painted up, you know, in the firelight, under the stars, just gives them a taste of this Australia that existed before and continues through to this day, and how we feel so strongly about who we are, you know, and proud of that, you know. So I think it can unite Australia, and it can bring understanding, you know. And I think with understanding comes a whole range of then things that their minds open up, you know, to us and hearts, and that's what we need. You know.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you to everyone for your questions. I understand we've held back. We're stopping you from having a cuppa and a yarn right now. So on that note, thank you for joining us. And if we can just have a round of applause for Rachel, Tamina and Carly. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. It just makes me reflect. There was one particular thing that we said, and I think all of the panellists talked about the data and the information that we currently hold. Now, most of us, our families, have old tapes and videos and those stories that are really important to us. And one of the things that I think we need to be reminded of is technology is moving so quickly that there'll come a time when you can't access them. So it's a really conscious decision now to start to preserve and, change them into different formats so that we will have that material for the generations to come. So thank you very much again to our panellists, and I just want to really quickly run you through where our timing is at. We'll have morning tea now and come back into the room if we can just a few minutes before 11:20 so that we can keep our panel on track after morning tea, and then we will break for lunch. There'll be you'll lose about 10 minutes in your lunch break, but that'll get us on track for the rest of the day. So see you all after morning tea.